Hi, Yves. We're just going live right now. So
Sorry.
no problem. If you just sit tight while I make sure we're connected to X and YouTube. So we're good to go on X. Just check in YouTube. And while I'm checking, I just want to say hello to everybody. Thank you for your patience. 1 second. And yes, we are live on YouTube. So let me begin by, first of all, wishing you all a most excellent International Workers' Day. As many people in our audience, I'm sure, would readily agree, it's our workers who produce what our society needs to prosper. It's therefore only fitting that we honor today the immense contribution of the working class to our collective well-being. And I'm very pleased to be joined again by Yves and Alex Tyrrell, Yves Engler and Alex Tyrrell. I'll get back to say a little bit about their backgrounds in a moment. I just want to sort of frame the subject for today's discussion, which will be the 45th federal election in Canada. We're going to try to have a three-way conversation about what we regard as the most pertinent aspects of this election for about an hour, and then we're going to hopefully, Yves, you can stick around until 1 p.m. Eastern time, because we'd like to allocate about 30 minutes to Q&A. Would you be able to stick around until then, Yves?
Yeah, that works.
Okay, great. And sorry, Alex apparently needs to be let back into the studio. So if you'll just bear with me. There he is. Hi, Alex. So Alex, I don't know if you heard me. Hi. So I'm just going to say some introductory remarks about the subject of this election. And Yves has confirmed he can stay until 1 p.m. Eastern time. So we'll have time, hopefully, for at least 30 minutes of Q&A. And everybody, when it comes time to Q&A, you can, if we address your question, you can address your question to any one of us, or two of us, or all of us. But we leave that up to you. Okay. So with that introductory remark, this was the fourth consecutive election in which the Liberals won the prerogative to form a government. But like the last one, this Liberal government, led by Prime Minister Mark Carney, will be in a minority. And this means that the Liberals will have to rely on at least one of the other parties to implement their agenda. And of course, depending on how things unfold, they might, with respect to one legislative priority, rely upon one party and then rely upon another, kind of ping-ponging amongst the various parties in Canada's parliament to get, the legislation passed that they want to pursue in this 45th parliament. Now, the fact that it's a minority also means that this government might not last very long, especially in the volatile political conditions prevailing in the West today. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Canada's political system, it's modeled after the British parliamentary system. This means that Canadians do not vote directly for the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is generally the leader of the political party that wins the most seats. And there are 343 ridings in Canada, 343 seats in Canada's parliament. So we're holding this live stream today to break down what happened in this election and to talk about where Canada goes from here. We're going to try to situate this election in the context of broader trends and crises in the world today. And so, as I mentioned, one of our guests today is Alex Tyrrell, the leader of the Green Party of Quebec. And Alex, in the last Green Party of Canada leadership contest held in 2022, he threw his hat into the ring. And you can say a little bit more about this if you so choose, Alex. He was prevented from running by the party brass because they objected to his views on the Ukraine war. So thank you for joining us, Alex. And please let us know, where are you joining us from today?
Right now I'm in Hangzhou, China. I'm here on a 2-week trip. The first week was at the invitation of the Chinese government to discuss issues related to the Canada-China relationship, and now I'm doing a bit of solo traveling in the week after.
Okay, great. Safe travels. And Yves Engler is an author and activist. Both Yves and Alex are fierce critics of Western imperialism and Canadian government foreign policy, something that has not endeared them, or me, frankly, to the political elite or the corporate media. And so Yves, as I've covered recently on Reason to Resist, is currently engaged in a legal battle because he had the temerity to criticize a genocidal racist on X. So he never met her, never emailed her. He was kind of unwillingly exposed to her constant racist commentary. And we just learned, Yves, that she's heading off to Florida, Dahlia Kurtz, where she feels she'll be safer. In any event, Yves, where are you joining us from today?
That would be the best result of the election, is Dahlia Kurtz is going to no longer be with us in this country. I'm coming from Jojage, Montreal.
Wonderful. So let's start by looking at the overall result in this election. And these are the final or next to final numbers published by the CBC, Canada's national broadcaster. So you need 172 seats for a majority. The Liberals won the greatest number of seats, 169, with 43.7% of the popular vote. The Conservatives, significantly behind, but very close in the popular vote, 144 seats and 41.3% of the popular vote. The Bloc Québécois, which, for those of you who don't know, confines itself to the province of Quebec. It doesn't run candidates nationally. Its mandate, its mission, is to protect and advance the interests of Quebec in the Canadian Federation. So nonetheless, it had the third highest number of seats at 22, with 6.3% of the popular vote. The New Democratic Party also had 6.3% of the popular vote, but only got 7 seats. And, that's because the New Democrats, their votes were spread across the country, whereas the Bloc Québécois, their votes were all concentrated in the province of Quebec. And then came the Green Party of Canada, which almost disappeared from the electoral map, 1 seat and 1.3% of the popular vote. Now, the NDP dropped from 25 seats and 18% of the popular vote in 2021 to the result I just showed you, 7 seats and 6.3% of the popular vote. That was really just an astonishing decline in the space of one election. The Greens dropped from 2 seats and 2.3% of the popular vote in the 2021 election to 1 seat and 1.3%, as we just saw. It's important to note that the popular vote that the Greens obtained in the 2021 election, 2.3%, was its lowest share of the popular vote in more than 20 years. You have to go all the way back to the 2000 election. So the Green Party was already in serious trouble before this election. As for the NDP, its leader, Jagmeet Singh, was unable to win his own riding. And in my opinion, he did the right thing. When it became clear that he wasn't going to win his own seat, he resigned on election night. The Green Party leader, Elizabeth May, by contrast, has not resigned, and as far as I know, has given no indication that she intends to resign. Now, these two parties, we're going to focus on the Greens and the NDP to begin with, and then we'll switch to the Conservatives and the Liberals. In the so-called mainstream discourse in Canada, they are typically characterized as being left-wing political parties. So, Alex, I'm curious, what are your thoughts about that? Do you think that's a fair assessment of the Greens and the NDP, given their current policy orientation?
Not really. I think that the Green Party and the NDP have really gone to the center over the years and have allowed the right wing to really determine the agenda and set kind of the framing for a lot of the issues. So when it comes to things like spending on the military, both the NDP and Greens gave in to the right wing narrative that this is inevitable, that we have to spend all kinds of money on warfare and expectively maybe make some cuts into social programs for that, as the Liberals are proposing. So unfortunately, we don't have any real big left-wing party in Canada at this point.
What's your view about this, Yves? Do you think that calling these parties, characterize them as left-wing, is a fair assessment?
I mean, it depends. I don't think. I think the NDP does somewhat reflect, and the Greens for that matter, broader patterns on the left. For instance, I don't think there is any real substantive movement calling for economic democracy or putting forward a alternative to capitalism that would draw the NDP or the Greens further to the left. So I wouldn't put all of the blame, for that, for their very compromised kind of positions on the party structures and the candidates and stuff like that. A significant amount of it is their fault as well, but because they I think block a space for sort of more bold kind of proposals. But I don't know. I mean, they are a bit more left wing than the Liberals are, and but all the parties have basically conceded to not just capitalism, but have conceded to Western imperialism very clearly, and I would say just kind of like the system in general.
Right. So let's take a closer look at the results for the NDP in this election. And I've decided to focus on four high-profile candidates of the NDP. The first one is Matthew Green from Hamilton Center. Hamilton is an industrial city, a large working-class voter base. Matthew was the incumbent, and I always viewed Matthew as a young and rising star within the NDP. And surprisingly, not only did he not win, he actually finished behind the Conservative candidate in Hamilton Center. You see in the upper left-hand corner of that chart, he got 29.1% of the vote, Conservative 29.9%, and the Liberal Victor Asiam Arana got 37.6%. And then over in the upper right-hand corner, this is the riding of Churchill, and the incumbent NDP candidate, Nikki Ashton, lost by a significant margin to the Liberal candidate who garnered 45.6% of the vote. Nikki got 28.9%. I think this was either her third or fourth time running in this riding. She had been the representative of this riding for at least 2 parliamentary terms, if not more than that. Maybe my colleagues can correct me. And Nikki ran to be the leader of the NDP in 2017, along with Charlie Angus and Jagmeet Singh, before Jagmeet Singh parachuted into the race, well after Nikki and Charlie had declared their intention to seek the leadership. Nikki and Charlie were the front runners, and Nikki was a serious prospect to win. So she's been now defeated from the caucus of the NDP. In the lower left-hand corner, this is the riding of Vancouver Centre. And you'll see the NDP candidate there was Avi Lewis, who comes from the Lewis family. I guess you could fairly describe them as NDP royalty. Avi is the partner. He's a documentary filmmaker. If you don't know who he is the partner of Naomi Klein. And really was quite fearless and eloquent in defense of the Palestinian cause in this election. He and Naomi have, for many years, been publicly supportive of the Palestinian cause, unlike some other members of the Lewis family. Nonetheless, Avi fell to defeat and was a distant third. Hedy Fry got 55.2% of the vote, and Avi got 12.6%. I would have thought that, Avi was, if he had won, he would be a serious, very serious candidate to become the leader of the NDP. I don't know whether that is, given his loss, a realistic prospect for him in the near future. And then there's Ottawa Centre, and there, Joel Harden, you'll see, finished in second place. He was the representative of that riding in the Ontario legislature, very popular amongst the left in Canada. Again, another outspoken defender of the Palestinian cause, and he finished way behind the Liberal winner, Yasser Naqvi, who had 62.7% of the vote, Joel Harden 19.5%. So to me, these people, and there are others, of course, but these were people who would be serious contenders to rise to the leadership. And I'm curious, Yves, your thoughts about, where does the NDP go from here in terms of a leader? Who do you think are the most likely people to throw their hat into the ring to seek to replace Jagmeet Singh? And what do you think their prospects are of securing the leadership?
Yeah, I mean, I think Heather McPherson's name's been thrown around. I don't think that Nikki Ashton, because losing is going to be as big of an obstacle for her to go for the leadership because she has won in the past. I think it is a big blow to Avi. I'm taken aback by how poorly Avi did, and also for that matter, Joel Harden. Honestly, it's those are fairly depressing results from a left perspective and from a pro-Palestinian perspective, because that my impression from the outside was that Avi specifically, but also Joel, they both had fairly substantive volunteer bases, and they were running fairly significant campaigns, and to only get those kind of numbers despite having serious amount of activist support, I think that does say that people are not they're not being convinced by the issues that are being presented, be that the Palestine issue or more forceful challenges to economic inequality or the ecological crisis. But I think it will be. I don't think Avi is going to have a chance. I think Avi does want to run to be leader of the NDP, but I don't think this is going to be a real blow for that possibility. I would have preferred an Avi Lewis as a leader than Jagmeet Singh. I think that Avi was going to speak to a more left-wing vision. Yeah, I don't know where it's going to go within the NDP, and who would be who are the realistic leadership candidates. I don't like Heather McPherson. I mean, she's come out on Palestine over the past 18 months, but aside from Palestine, she's been NDP foreign critic, and she's very much an establishment pro-NATO outlook, except with the Palestine issue, where she's been, I think, pushed to take up the issue. Yeah, things don't look very good for the NDP, certainly in the short to medium term.
And Yves, you've written extensively about some prolific figures within the organized labor movement in Canada having supported what we, I think, on the anti-imperialist left would regard as right-wing militaristic policies, and I saw some indications that the leadership of some unions was cozying up quite a bit to the Conservatives and the Liberals in recent years. Do you think that contributed to the defeat of Matthew Green in Hamilton Centre? And why do you think this is happening? Why do you think that there are, quite important leaders of organized labor in Canada who seem to be developing a warm rapport with the Conservatives and the Liberals?
Well, there's no doubt. I don't know the exact number, but I think it was like 16 or 18 different unions endorsed Poilievre. A lot of them were like police associations and more traditional right-wing unions, but there was a little bit of breaking into some of the trades that I think have not necessarily endorsed Conservatives in the past. On the provincial level in Ontario, that's even more stark, right? Doug Ford was able to get. I mean, Doug Ford did his re-election launch at the Unifor office in Windsor, and he really played up his sort of defense of the auto sector in light of Donald Trump's trade war. And Doug Ford has, worked, I think, fairly, a fair bit on sort of reaching out to unions. Now, Sid Ryan had a piece, the former president of the Ontario Federation of Labor and head of CUPE Ontario, where he does exactly that. He talks about how, the union industrial heartland of Ontario, from Windsor to Hamilton, London, all that, conservatives won everything. And that is, these are places that have traditional, obviously Hamilton, Steel Town has traditional, industrial jobs and union, fairly substantive union power. So there, I guess, is a really, stark decline in private sector unionization rates. They're not as bad as the U.S., but they have declined substantially. And obviously there's a race and I guess a patriarchal element to it. It kind of plays to, Doug Ford plays to sort of male labor and sort of union traditional steel jobs and stuff like that, versus increasingly public sector unions or more women. So there's some of those dynamics. I think also just the fear of what the union movement is basically in a kind of retrenchment, particularly in the private sector. It's just keep what we have. It's not trying to move forward, and so in that context, sort of like just defend us from Donald Trump. There's not really any vision. That was Sid Ryan's point. There's no real vision. The unions have become just kind of dues collecting agencies without sort of hardly any political vision and hardly any education. Hey, push for socialism. He talks about how Poilievre even raised going after the RAND formula, the union dues formula, and there was no pushback from the Canadian Labour Congress during the Poilievre brought it up during elections. So there's, I think it's a pretty grim comment on the state of certainly the private sector unions. I worked at Unifor for about a couple of years when it merged from the Communications Energy Paperworkers Union a decade ago, and it was already kind of tacking to the right, but we've just seen that go even further in that direction. I don't like the NDP that much, but to have a formal connection with a party that ostensibly is a party of labor at least has some logic to it. Just going, supporting the Liberals, which Unifor has done, and then in some cases, unions going right over and supporting the Conservative Party. I mean, you've got to a point where you don't have any sort of egalitarian, anti-systemic kind of analysis, but you're just sort of jumping around, in partisan kind of ways.
Right. So now let's take a look at the what I would sort of regard as the star candidates for the Green Party. And before I do that, I just want to say, in the interest of full disclosure, some of you may not know that I ran to be the leader of the Green Party of Canada in 2020 and lost on the 8th and final ballot to Annamie Paul, who got 55% of the vote on the 8th ballot, and I got 45%. Annamie Paul became the leader of the Green Party of Canada in late 2020 and resigned approximately a year later after a disastrous and tumultuous year, which maybe we can get into later. But I thought I wanted people to just know that background. I'm not kind of like a neutral observer here. I have my own history with the Green Party. Like Alex, I was precluded from actually running at the beginning of the leadership contest in 2020, related to my critiques of supporters of Israel. But ultimately, I appealed and was allowed into the race about 4 months before the actual vote. So in any case, these are the four candidates that I would have thought were the candidates who were most likely to win. So we'll start with the upper right-hand corner. This is the Vancouver Island riding of Saanich Gulf Islands. This is Elizabeth May's riding. Interestingly, the polls showed that it was a toss-up. Well, I was going by 338canada.com, a fairly reliable projector of electoral results, and they had it as a toss-up. But at the end of the day, Elizabeth May, the current leader of the Green Party, won by a significant margin, well under 50%, but nonetheless comfortably ahead of the Liberal David Beckham. Then in Kitchener Centre, this is the other riding where the Greens had an MP in the prior Parliament, Mike Maurice. He finished second in a nail-biter. He lost to the Conservative candidate, interestingly. I would have thought if he was going to lose, it would be the Liberal. And he lost by only, it looks like, 350 or 60 votes. And then Outremont, a Montreal area riding, that's where the co-leader of Elizabeth May, Jonathan Pedneau, ran. This was I would imagine, a quite disappointing result for him and the party. He finished in last place out of 5 candidates with less than 10% of the vote. And then there was Paul Manley. This was quite surprising to me as well. Paul ran. He's very popular with the left and the Green Party base. He ran in the 2019 election and won. That was the first time he became a member of Parliament. And he lost in 2021 after Annamie Paul's chief spokesperson and advisor, a fanatical lunatic Zionist by the name of Noah Zatzman, began to attack Paul and the other Green Party MP at the time, Jenica Atwin, in the national media because they had described Israel correctly as an apartheid state. And this whole tumult, around Zatzman's attacks on 2 out of the 3 MPs in the Green Party caucus was, I think it's fair to say, the main reason why Annamie Paul's 1 year as the leader was a disaster for the party. In any event, he tried to make a comeback in this election, and sadly, he finished 4th, well behind the winner, the Conservative winner. With that, I turn it over to you, Alex. First of all, I'd like to ask you, I didn't mention Jonathan Pedneau resigned, understandably so, as co-leader. You've had quite a bit to say and write in recent weeks about Pedneau's brief time as co-leader of the Green Party. What is your take on Pedneau's contribution, if any, to Green Party politics and his decision to resign?
Yeah, well, under Pedneau's leadership, we saw a really radical departure from the founding principles of the Green Party, which include peace and nonviolence. Jonathan Pedneau was pushing a more militaristic agenda. As Yves had pointed out, he had supported the buying of fighter jets for Canada. He had supported militarizing the Arctic, increasing the number of troops. So this is really a radical shift from what the Green Party started out as. And Jonathan was sort of parachuted with the support of Elizabeth May, similar to the way that Annamie Paul was in the previous election. There's a lot of similarities between the two. Both of them had spent the majority of the last 15 years working outside of the country, and sort of came back and were immediately, projected into this role of Green Party leader. So it's kind of particular. Of course, Jonathan became the co-leader of the party without winning a leadership race, and was essentially appointed to the position by Elizabeth May. What is really striking is that the Green Party leadership told us that we have to sort of go to the center and support this increased drive for militarization in order to win support. But it did not work out that way. In fact, this shift failed to inspire people to be involved with the party. The party came up short by over 100 candidates. So there was 1/3 of the districts were left without a Green Party candidate. They had actually fewer candidates than when Annamie Paul ran. And of course, that was the first election since 2004 that the party did not have a full slate. So these show how deep these problems go, and they show that going to the center is not the way to have success. I mean, so many people want to run for the Green Party for the right reasons, right? To go and oppose war and be for the environment and for left-wing politics. And there's far fewer people that are interested in being involved to sort of play this kind of centrist game. So the results kind of speak for themselves on that front. And I think that if the Green Party would have stayed true to its roots and put forward a strong left-wing platform and uncompromising in terms of its calls for peace, that it would have been able to capitalize on that, especially when we look at what's happening with the genocide in Palestine. The leadership didn't call for sanctions on the state of Israel. Paul Manley did, to his credit. So I think that it's really unfortunate that he finished such a distant finish in his district. And another thing that's interesting is that now that Jonathan Pedno has resigned, if you look at the Green Party website, Elizabeth May is back to being the leader of the party. She's abandoned the co-leadership title. So I would think that would mean that there would not be like an election for a new co-leader or the appointment of an interim co-leader. So it's a bit of a centralization that way. And now the question is, how is the Green Party going to renew itself going forward? Because we're sort of back to the one-person show of Elizabeth May being the only member of Parliament and also being now the leader of the party. This has been the case for many, many years now. Elizabeth has led the party nearly uninterrupted since 2006. She's she's going into her 70s now, and some people think that she might want to stay on for another 10 years or something like that. So I've called on Elizabeth to sit as an independent to allow the party to progress. And I think that if Elizabeth May were to sit as independent, not only could the Green Party renew itself, hopefully without her interference, but it would also allow her to concentrate a little bit more on her district. She's somebody who, regularly speaks about how being a member of parliament and representing her constituents is the most important thing. It's worth noting that in this election, she did endorse strategic voting and therefore did not call on every voter to vote for the Green Party candidate, regardless of where they live. She made a video at the outset of the campaign saying that people should look at the progressive candidates in their district. And I think it would also be a way for Elizabeth to build on her legacy, because it's very uncommon for people to be elected as independents in the Canadian parliamentary system. Elizabeth May, I think, would have a shot at being reelected in her district. And perhaps a compromise that could be worked out would be that if she would allow the party to be renewed, that the party would not run a candidate against her in her district where she would run as an independent in the next election. So it's a bit of a challenge that I'd like to throw her way. Is she ready to allow the Green Party to renew itself? Would she accept this challenge of being an independent MP and building on her legacy that way?
Right. Another alternative, of course, is that she could resign as leader, precipitate a leadership contest, and then when the new leader is chosen, she could offer that leader, if that person so chose, to run in a by-election in her riding after she resigns from her riding. So that's another alternative. I just want to share with our audience this missive that the Green Party put out after this terrible election result. It's hard to read. I'm going to try to just point out the highlights for you. They talk about the incredible support, express appreciation for the financial and time contributions, expresses sadness for the loss of Mike Maurice, and then announces Jonathan Pedno, our co-leader, has also made the difficult decision to step down from his role. His fresh perspective and bold ideas have energized our movement. I don't see any evidence that the movement is energized, but they went on and said, and his commitment to a better future has inspired many. And then the next paragraph, this is just before they ask for more money. They say, I've highlighted it, Elizabeth's victory stands as a beacon of hope. I don't know what to say, man. I mean, I don't see much hope in the party continuing to be represented by Elizabeth. What do you think, Yves, Elizabeth May should do in this situation? It's quite an unusual situation. Obviously, they have only one MP, Elizabeth May.
Elizabeth has already come out and said that she would like to be the Speaker of the House. And she's suggesting that she's willing to take a position in the cabinet, according to this CTV story. I don't know how that would play exactly with what she's doing. I mean, I completely agree. I'm not convinced that a bold left-wing platform would have led to a better result for the Green Party. I don't think it would have led to a worse result. I agree it would have led to more candidates in a different field across the country, and that's important. I think the burden is on the right-wing forces to prove that their strategy of adopting right-wing policies is going to lead to success, and if they can't succeed on their own terms, then that's a really blow. That's really damaging, because so if you have a more left-wing strategy, you're not just, okay, we're just trying to win seats, or we're just completely electoralist, but we're trying to change the whole conversation in the political arena. Jonathan Petno, I attended his foreign policy launch. He did not in any way try to change the conversation. Literally what he said could have been said by Jagmeet Singh, could have been said by Mark Carney. It was just completely establishment kind of talking points about world affairs. And that more or less generalized across the board with slight variations. So a Green Party that's putting forward an eco-socialist proposal platform that doesn't succeed in terms of winning that many votes or electing that many MPs, obviously you prefer to have the socialist platform with lots of MPs and lots of votes, but at least it's part of a broader political strategy. What we saw from them is clearly not part of a broader political strategy. It's part of Elizabeth May being somebody who has been from the establishment. That's her history. She's not really somebody who sees an alternative to capitalism. She, at this point, honestly, if you're you're basically accepting the climate crisis as well. You're accepting like ecological catastrophe at this point, if you're not proposing some serious challenges to the endless consumption of capitalism and obviously the incredible economic inequality that comes with it as well. But yeah, so I think that they obviously there should be an effort to have a left-wing Green Party that can impact the broader discussion. I think that's really important. Now, in terms of the Palestine question, I think we have to. I don't know how to exactly process this. The polls show the public is increasingly sympathetic to Palestinian rights. We've had this big activist momentum, but it hasn't really translated into certainly electoral, and I would even argue broader left organizing, or with very modest exceptions like Spring Magazine and the work they're doing in Toronto. All this activism that's been going on, it really hasn't been channeled into any kind of outlet. Now, if Dimitri, if you would have been the leader of the Green Party, putting forward an eco-socialist proposal while there's mass demonstrations across the country in Palestine, maybe we would have been able to channel more of that energy into sort of like broader political organizing. I don't know. I don't think that's easy to do. It's possible, but what we're seeing right now is that it really hasn't manifested itself in any kind of significant way. In fact, it shows the opposite.
Yeah. Personally, I don't think these candidates, the ones that I've highlighted, lost because of their support for Palestine. I mean, Heather McPherson, for all of her flaws, has been recently a pretty outspoken defender of the Palestinian cause. And of course, Alexandre Boulahis, the one Quebec MP for the NDP after this election, has been, by the standards of Canadian politics, a pretty robust defender of the Palestinian cause, and he won. So it seems to me that these candidates lost because of something else that's going on. And I want to turn now to that something else. What is it? The two parties that emerged victorious, or first and second, have had a vice grip on political power for the entire post-World War II period in Canada. These, of course, are the Liberals and the Conservatives. Together in this election, they garnered a whopping 85% of the popular vote, which is far higher than their collective share of the popular vote in any recent election. So, for example, in 2021, the Liberals and Conservatives won collectively 66% of the popular vote, with the Conservatives winning slightly more of the popular vote than the Liberals, even though the Conservatives won less seats in that election. In 2019, the Liberals and Conservatives collectively won 67% of the popular vote. Again, that's much below the 85% they garnered together in this election. In 2019, the Conservatives again won slightly more of the popular vote than the Liberals, but again won fewer seats. And then finally, in 2015, that election, together they won 71% of the popular vote. Now, just before the vote in this election, the polling firm Abacus Data asked Canadians what they viewed as the two most important factors in their voting decision. And I thought that this was quite revealing. So I'm just going to pull it up here. So these are, again, this is not the most important factor. They asked which two of these are most important in deciding how you will vote. Number one was reducing your cost of living. 45% that was said that was one of the two most important factors. Dealing with Donald Trump was, a distant second, 30%. And then making housing more affordable was 20%, growing the economy, 19% said that was one of their two most important factors, improving Canada's healthcare system. And then if you go all the way down, supporting Ukraine in its fight against Putin's Russia, was identified by only 2% of the voters as one of the two most important factors. I just point out that approximately 4% of the Canadian population is either wholly or partly of Ukrainian origin, and only 2%. And the Liberals and the Conservatives, all the parties supported the transfer of massive amounts of money and weaponry to Ukraine since the war began. Approximately $20 billion went towards Ukraine. And this number, it's just mind-blowing to me. This is such an insignificant issue for the vast majority of Canadians, certainly not a priority for them. And yet the entire political elite was lined up, every single party in Parliament enthusiastically supported the transfer of $20 billion. That's a lot of money by Canadian standards, folks. This is
Palestine wasn't it wasn't stopping the genocide as a question.
Not that I know of, and that's exactly a point I wanted to make. Thank you for raising that, Yves. Why? Why didn't they ask that question? I think that's quite telling. In any event, the narrative has been, what I keep reading in the press, is that the parties, everybody shifted massively to these two parties because, they were perceived to be the ones who were best able to deal with Trump. But as you can see here, only less than a third of Canadian voters identified dealing with Trump as one of the two most important issues for them. And if you looked at I don't have the slide here, but the polls were showing that although Mark Carney was perceived by most Canadians to be better equipped to deal with Trump, the difference between Carney and Poilievre was really not that great in terms of people's perceptions about how well they would deal with Trump. So I don't think that this really comes remotely close. This idea that Trump, caused a massive shift in voting towards the Liberals, that really adds up when you look at these numbers and the other numbers I mentioned about how Canadians viewed, the ability of Poilievre to deal effectively with Trump. As I say, he wasn't that far behind Carney. So, Yves, why do you think the Liberals and Conservatives won so much more of the popular vote in this election than in recent elections?
I think there were a lot of people who didn't like Poilievre. I have to say, on a personal level, I haven't liked any of the prime ministers that I've ever lived under, and I haven't really liked the leaders of any of the opposition parties that I've lived under either. But I thought Poilievre, there was a real, possibility that he is a particularly ideological person in the context of Donald Trump moving in a fairly fascistic direction, and particularly on the Palestine question. I was more fearful of him than I have been of recent conservative candidates to lead. So I think that Poilievre there was a sort of polarizing dynamic that he brings about, which did, undercut the NDP and the Bloc Québécois, and it was an anti-Poilievre vote in large part. And if the NDP has been kind of in a quasi alliance with the Liberals for the past few years, they're not offering much difference. Same thing with the Bloc Québécois for that matter. Then and you're concerned about Poilievre, then it makes sense to just rally behind Cardi. So I think that's an important part of it. I think that this poll here maybe slightly underestimates the Trump factor in all this. The other part, I think that the part I would say that's the most stark for the left in this is that question number 1 and number 3 are arguably the same, people saying the same thing. Cost of living, obviously housing is an important part of cost of living. That is an issue that I find it stunning how incapable like left-wing forces are in just putting forward a pretty simple proposal. Let's take I don't go with a number, 50 billion a year and put it into social housing. It's absolutely not a complicated affair. It is contrary to neoliberal ideology, and it might upset some house owners. But the idea of just taking significant social resources and building lots of public housing on land that the public already owns, because the federal government and different levels of government own tons of land already in most cities, that seems like a really easy proposal. And to take it one step further and kind of left-wing rhetoric, say instead of increasing all this money in the military, which all the parties agreed to, hitting the 2%, which would be $40 billion more a year per year forever, take that $40 billion a year and just put it into housing. They're making claims on those levels of resources. They're just not making claims on those level of resources for public housing. It's okay for F-35s and new naval vessels. So some of those kind of issues seem they're not complicated at all for a left-wing party to put forward, but they're unwilling to put them forward. And to the extent there may be some willingness, obviously the media blocks it out, but that's where activism, that's where being bold and creative and relentless become essential.
Yeah. Alex, when I look at this, the thing that mystifies me, if you look at this list of factors, which, are uppermost in the minds of Canadian voters, I mean, things got this way. So, for example, housing becoming increasingly unaffordable for so many Canadians, the cost of living, straining the finances of more and more Canadian families, the degradation of the healthcare system. All this stuff happened under Liberals and Conservatives, so the voters almost seem to be rewarding them for creating the problems that are uppermost in the minds of most Canadians. I just find this absolutely mystifying. And I hate to say this, because fundamentally, I do believe that most voters, if you give them the right information, they will generally make decisions that are in the best interests of their families, their financial security, the prosperity of the state, peace, security, and so forth. So the conclusion that I lean towards after looking at these results is that, voters nowadays are making decisions based upon superficial considerations. And they just, Mark Carney comes across as a person of gravitas, that narrative about him having been an excellent crisis manager, which is complete BS, because, the reason why we did better than the Americans and other states, Western states, in the financial crisis is because we had a better banking regulatory regime, which was put in place before Mark Carney became the governor of the Bank of Canada. So he didn't really do squat to get us through the financial crisis of 2007 to 2009. I mean, do you think it's a fair interpretation of all of this, Alex, that a lot of voters are just making decisions on the basis of superficial considerations or misinformation from the media, or is there something I'm missing here?
I think that if you look at Pierre Poilievre's narrative, he plays on a lot of working class themes, right? Like I've seen him make speeches about how it's such a big problem in Canada with the housing crisis, and that 30-year-olds are living in their parents' basement and they don't have the opportunity to own their own home and that kind of thing. But when it comes to the solutions are just to deregulate, environmental and zoning regulations and that sort of thing, and not put the federal money towards social housing, and certainly not to kind of pull the market approach back and put some real limits on how corporate landlords can exploit everyday working people. So I think your average Canadian maybe doesn't follow these things that much in depth, and when they hear the leaders talking about the housing crisis, whether it be liberal or conservative, they're a little bit gullible and they maybe accept what's being said. There's also this idea that change is impossible. People are not really very ambitious with the change that they're demanding. And I think, the situation with Donald Trump scared a lot of Canadians, right? Not just on the economic front, but also on the annexation front. And they saw, Carney had managed to define his image, as mentioned, as a crisis manager and that kind of thing. And I think also that people did not trust Poilievre to stand up to Trump because they're so similar ideologically. Like if you look at their approach on Palestine, as you were mentioning, it's fascistic. They're both talking about deporting people who stand up for Palestine. They're both talking about cutting funding to universities that tolerate pro-Palestine protests on their campuses. They're both railing against wokeism and that sort of thing. So people did not trust Poilievre to stand up to Trump because they're so close in ideology. And so I think a lot of the people who voted Liberal, they voted that to stop Carney. And we've got sort of a return to the two-party system where people are, either voting Conservative to stop Liberal or voting Liberal to stop Conservative. And, when you get into that kind of very short-term priority, a lot of things can be completely overlooked. So that, combined with the fact that the other parties are not really proposing clear alternatives, like the NDP housing policy was not to overturn capitalism and put the housing in the hands of people who live in it, right? There's also the fact that within Canada, there's a lot of people who do own their own homes, and ultimately the property owners have an interest in the price of real estate continuing to rise. So any significant regulation to the real estate market is met with a bit of pushback from the people who own property. The thing is, I find that's also short-sighted, because even people who own their own homes, if the value of the properties go up, the taxes go up, the insurance goes up, it becomes more difficult to maintain. And plus, if you only own one home and you sell it, you still have to buy another one afterwards. So even though people are looking at their net worth rising because of the deregulation of the housing market and the fact that it's going up for all kinds of different reasons, they're unwilling to really endorse any kind of significant policy that will restrict the role of capitalism within the housing market.
Now, before I ask both of you my last question, I just want to point out, we were talking earlier about, I expressed the view that the losses of these, robust supporters of the Palestinian cause, I don't think that had anything to do, or much to do, with the fact that they lost. And I think, in support of my interpretation, I would point out that the yapping Zionist Chihuahua, as I am fond of calling him, Pierre Poilievre, lost his own riding. He lost to the Liberal candidate who got 51% of the vote, and Poilievre got 46, even though the overall result for the Conservative Party was one of the best results in terms of the popular vote in many elections. So if this man, who is by far the most fanatic, frothing at the mouth, lunatic supporter of Israel of all the party leaders, loses in his own riding, I think that's a pretty powerful piece of evidence that, support for Israel or opposition to Israel's genocide is not having a significant impact on individual contests. In any event, if you guys want to chime in on that, please feel free to do so. But I want to go to my last question so we can have some time for Q&A. Let me remove the yapping Zionist Chihuahua from the screen. And it's a big question, an important question, probably the most important question we're going to address today. And I'm going to start with you, Yves, and then I'll ask Alex to offer us his perspective. What kind of a government do you think Mark Carney is going to present? And how long do you think this government is going to last? Do you think they're going to be a short-term government? As I mentioned at the outset, it's a minority government. Or do you think they're going to be able to implement substantial parts of their agenda? But most importantly, what I'd like to hear from both of you is, what do you think, despite all the promises and the hoopla, what do you think their actual agenda is going to be?
Yeah, I mean, they didn't. Traditionally, the Liberals kind of campaign to the left and then govern to the right. In this case, Carney more or less campaigned to the right, and I presume he's going to govern to the right. He capital gains, carbon tax. He accepted the conservatives' position on all this kind of stuff. So I would assume that. Now, the fact the actual dynamics, though, would undercut that in terms of it is a minority. So they will probably need the NDP at some points, or the Bloc. So that will restrict going too far to the right, I would assume. Now, I think it will last, because I think that, Poilievre isn't in the House of Commons, and I think it's about like 6 months they have to, if he wants to run in some other conservative resign and then run in their seat. I would assume the Liberals won't try to help Poilievre out, so keep him out of the House of Commons as long as possible would be their aim. I think the Trump thing is such a wild card in all this, because it is a little bit unclear, what Trump plans to do from day one to the next. I don't believe, big picture here, Mark Carney was a investment banker in the Brookfield asset, which is a nearly $1 trillion Canadian investment company that has more than a century long history of imperialism in Latin America, around the world.
Yves, just to point out, he was actually not just an investor, he's chair of the board of Brookfield right up until the time he threw his hat into the ring in the Liberal leadership contest this year. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so governor of the Bank of Canada, governor of the Bank of England. This is somebody who is of the capitalist elite, global capitalist elite. So there's very little chance that he's going to, make life more difficult on billionaires beyond the most superficial kind of way. Same thing with regards to most of foreign policy. Now, I think foreign policy, Trump has thrown foreign policy into a little bit of a question mark. I think there is a little bit of a chance that Carney is going to say, move a little bit more towards China because of just the anti-Trump dynamic. Carney, in his speech on Monday night in election, he said, the relationship with the U.S. is broken and it's never going back type of speech, fairly kind of strong language on that, which he said more or less that a few other occasions. This is for public consumption. I mean, the Canadian military is right now involved in exercises with the Americans and the Filipinos that's designed to target China. Canadian naval vessel that's with its U.S. counterparts going towards going around the world. Actually, we're going towards towards Russia. You have Canadian officers still training with the U.S. You have the whole structure. I mean, there was just Puglisi has a story about Canada buying $100 million in U.S. night vision goggle type equipment from the U.S. company. So they're not even these really sort of simple things of backing away a little bit from the U.S. empire, while Carney is making these grand declarations of we're breaking from the U.S., which the public clearly wants. He's doing that for public consumption. In the reality of it, the vast majority of our kind of alignment with the U.S. Continues as usual, which is because most of Canada's capitalist class doesn't want to change things, even with Donald Trump, as kind of over the top as he is, even as he's threatening their interests in some different ways. They are totally, they see the world, they profit from the world in a very similar way to the U.S. Capitalist class, and so so I doubt we're going to see much substantive change. I do sort of think this government's going to last for a while, but it's going to be more or less a continuation of maybe a little bit slightly to the right on domestic policy of Justin Trudeau, and maybe slightly sort of, let's call it, to the left on foreign policy.
And so, Alex, if you could comment in particular on foreign policy that we can anticipate from Carney. By the way, somebody just pointed out in the chat, and I confirmed it by a quick internet search, that there are these bushfires raging in Palestine, occupied Palestine, and apparently Canada Park has been completely destroyed by these bushfires. Wow. In any event, I just had to share that since we're on the subject of foreign policy. Alex, I saw Carney declare that Canada is a proud member of the coalition of the willing that is being cobbled together to support NATO's proxy regime in Ukraine. I can't imagine a more unfortunate phrase. I mean, how can you be so tone deaf as to use the phrase coalition of willing when it's closely associated with the criminal war of aggression on Iraq? Just blows my mind. But in any event, what kind of policies, domestic and foreign, but particularly foreign, do you think we're going to see from Mark Carney? And do you think that this Liberal minority government is likely to last?
Yeah, well, let me start by saying that I agree with everything that Yves said, but I think that it's also really up to Canadians how much pressure do people put on Mark Carney, right? Because it is still a minority government. He does have to have the support of some other parties. And is he going to govern through a period where there's huge social movements in Canada and widespread protest and Indigenous uprising and that kind of thing? Or is it going to be kind of calm, business as usual, and the government gets to set the agenda and they're uninterrupted by the social movements? And with respect to the foreign policy, I mean, he seems pretty hawkish, right? He said that China apparently is the biggest threat to Canada. At another point, though, in response to a protester, he sort of acknowledged that there was a genocide taking place in Palestine before it was called to order by Benjamin Netanyahu, and then backtracked as he was ordered to. So there's not much hope there. And yeah, for Ukraine, it's a similar situation with this coalition of the willing comment. And in this election also, it's worth noting that Pierre Poilievre sort of had been ambiguous on the Ukraine file before, but very clearly articulated his support for Ukraine during the campaign, even though he didn't really put it up front as much, because there's elements of his base that are a little bit less favorable to supporting Ukraine. So, like, he'll do it anyway, but he won't make as big a deal about it. And, I think the reality of the situation is that Canada doesn't need to invest more in its military. Our military is completely useless. We're not going to be using this military to fend off a U.S. invasion. It's not a military that can fight a war on its own. And the only thing that this military is used for is supporting the U.S. empire in their quest for global domination by providing a little patchwork of logistical support here and there. And I would hope that given the way that Trump is treating Canada, that we start to seriously cut some ties with the United States. It's one thing to do a bit of business and do some import and export, but we should be developing our own foreign policy, not going along with everything that the United States is doing, and kind of continue to push for this unipolar world around the United States. So I would hope that there would be some change on that front. Carney hasn't really been in politics for that long, so outside of economic issues, it's not like he has a very long and extensive track record of where he stands on a lot of social and political and geopolitical issues. But as you've said, like, he's coming from a billionaire class. I don't think that he's going to disrupt things, but it's also up to Canadians how much pressure do we apply to him. And I think that if the next few years would be like, the times of 2011, 2012, where we had the Occupy movement, followed by the Quebec student movement, and the I Don't Know More movement as well, that there is potential to have some positive change. But of course, we just elected a billionaire to be prime minister, so we've got our work cut out for us.
Right. We chose between a yapping Zionist Chihuahua and a former Goldman Sachs banker.
That's what's come to.
Yeah. So we got about 20 to 25 minutes left for Q&A. If you would like to ask a question, please type it into the chat box. As I mentioned at the outset, you can address your question to any one of us. You can address it to two of us or all of us. But I'll leave that up to you. And while we're waiting to see if anyone's going to put any questions to us, I wanted to just ask you both about your overall perspective on Trump's peace initiatives. Since let's just move outside of the realm of Canadian government, foreign policy, and domestic policy, but talk about these abortive efforts abortive may be too strong a word, but so far unsuccessful efforts to negotiate an end to the Ukraine war. Do you both think that Trump is serious, or do you think that this is all theater?
I think that Trump wants to end the war in Ukraine. I think that he wants to for a bunch of reasons, but partly just to be able to say that he brought it to an end. So yeah, I broadly am sympathetic to his position on that, and what he's, first of all, I think it's good to begin the dialogue with Russia, and secondly, I think that he's be a bit more kind of clear-eyed with the reality of the situation versus the sort of NATO jingoism of just keep fighting the last Ukrainian that has been pushed. Like, I think, for instance, the coalition, the Willing, that Canada's supposedly part of with some European countries, like that's going to collapse. That's not actually real, right? That they're doing that as a sort of to try to give the Ukrainians some belief that they should keep fighting and rather than negotiate. But it's not a real proposal. Once the U.S. withdraws its extensive support for the war, which Trump may or may not do, but he sort of suggested he will do if Zelensky doesn't do what he wants. So I think that now, with regards to Iran, I think that it's just so audacious for the Trump administration to be pressing for some sort of new nuclear agreement when they pulled out of an agreement that was already signed between many countries in Iran, when they have nuclear weapons, when Israel has nuclear weapons, when Trump's openly making threats to attack Iran, and so if you're the Iranian government's perspective, I understand why they would concede and this and that, but it's, I think when it comes to Iran, Trump is maybe not even just Trump personally. I think Trump personally might be happy to come to some sort of agreement, but that whole administration is so influenced by Israel and by kind of Zionist lobbying that there's, I think, the likely scenario is they're going to attack Iran.
So, Alex, I'm going to interrupt here, and just because we did have a couple of questions coming in, and perhaps we can swing back to this question of Trump's peace initiative. So, Yuri Smuter, hi Yuri. Yuri, great to see you again. Thank you for joining us today. Yuri asks, why do you think Trump sabotaged the Chihuahuas, i.e. Pierre Poilievre's efforts to become prime minister? He and Trump would have gotten along perfectly, along with the other far-right premiers. So I'll start with Alex. Alex, do you have a sense that Trump was somehow trying to undermine Poilievre's bid to become the next prime minister. I mean, he did seem, Trump, I don't know that his objective was to undermine Poilievre, but he did seem to be treating Carney rather more respectfully than he was treating the Governor Trudeau. What's your take on this?
I think that
Looks like Alex is frozen.
I don't.
Yves, well, go ahead.
Waiting for Alex. I don't think he was just trying to sabotage Poilievre. I think Donald Trump just does what Donald Trump wants to do, and he doesn't even differentiate. I think that one of the bigger picture of this election is the fact that this is benefiting. The Labour Party is probably going to win now in Australia, and the Labour Party, which is quite unpopular in the UK, apparently has had a fairly significant boost in its popularity. So the Trump effect is leading to that his sort of natural allies are not actually doing well. So he counters, which fits. I mean, Donald Trump is. I mean, even if you take on his term, like a lot of what he's doing is just dumb. I mean, it's just dumb for U.S. power, dumb for American capitalism. So I don't think that he was trying to help Carney. There's speculation on with the Trudeau, why he was so hostile to Trudeau. Everything from his wife gave looks at Trudeau back when they were together back in the first term, to all kinds of little sort of personal sort of things like that that have been put forward. And I think Trump probably genuinely believes this idea. A lot of the U.S. public believe that everyone in the world wants to be part of the U.S. Everyone, they're the greatest, and everyone wants to be part of it. And I think that when it comes to Mexico, they're like, no, we wouldn't want that because we don't want the Mexicans to be part of our country. But when it comes to Canada, they were like, yeah, well, they're mostly white, and so we won't want to be part of our country. So from Trump's perspective, and this sort of grandiose, I've made added to the U.S. Size of the U.S. and all that, it fits wanting Canada. How that impacts Canadian politics is sort of he doesn't really care. He doesn't even, I'm not sure he even understands or cares, because clearly his interventions didn't help the candidate in Canadian elections that was the most likely to align with him.
So it looks like we've lost Alex. Hopefully he'll rejoin us and we can get his take on the question from Yuri. I'll deal briefly with a couple other questions. Co-op W asks, me, did anyone take you up on your challenge yet? I'm pretty sure that our colleague is referring to my challenge to 24 Zionist lawyers to debate the question of whether Israel is committing genocide. Just by way of a quick background on that, there was a scandal involving a Syrian refugee being deplatformed when he was invited to speak to a large and important lawyers group in Canada. Zionist lawyers freaked out when they found out about this because he had once expressed sympathy for the Palestinian people on his X account. So the two lawyers who I thought were most responsible for the deplatforming of this Syrian refugee, I know them both personally. They're very successful Bay Street lawyers. Their names are Jonathan Lysis and Daryl Cruz. I challenged them on April 4th to a debate on the question of whether Israel is committing genocide. I emailed my video challenge to them on the following day just to make sure they had it. Neither of them has accepted my challenge. Daryl Cruz hasn't even responded. Lysis did respond by pointing out that he had represented a couple of Muslim clients in recent litigation after they were accused falsely of being supporters of terrorism, which I think really didn't have much, if anything, to do with his deplatforming of the Syrian refugee. But in any case, he hasn't accepted my challenge. So a week after that, I then broadened my challenge to 23 Zionist lawyers who tried to destroy the careers of some pro-Palestinian law students in Toronto, and to former Supreme Court of Canada Justice Rosalie Abella, who in January of last year wrote what I regard as a disgraceful op-ed in the Globe and Mail, castigating South Africa for bringing a genocide case against Israel. I emailed that challenge to them and to Miss Abella, who's now a visiting professor at Harvard Law School, to make sure that they were aware of my challenge and not a single one of them has even responded, let alone accepted the challenge. So I can't find anybody in Canada's legal profession to debate me on the question of whether Israel is committing genocide. If you happen to know some capable and successful Zionist lawyer out there who might be willing to take this up, please let me know, because I would very much value the opportunity to debate this. Yves, you were going to say something.
Well, Neil Oberman. You should ask Neil Oberman.
Oh, yes.
Candidate. I just bumped into him today. That's why I was running late at the Israel rally. And yeah, there's some video to come. You should definitely ask him.
Neil Doberman, as I like to call him. Yeah, so Doberman got, I think, defeated quite handily to another frothing at the mouth Zionist, Anthony Housefather. And what was the riding in Montreal? It was the name escapes me.
Mount
Royal. So Alex, we lost you just when you began to answer the question of whether you think Trump was trying to undermine Poilievre, and if so, why?
Yeah, I was just saying that Trump is a huge personality, right? And he's always railing against people who criticize him in any way, right? So look at like the Republican Party. As soon as somebody says the least bit of a critical word towards Trump, he looks to have them replaced. He's got a huge, disproportionate ego. So the fact that Poilievre said a couple of critical things here and there about Trump and his annexation threats and that kind of thing, it's almost like as if Trump took it personally and then figured that since Poilievre had spoken against him, that, Trump should work against him. So in a way, Trump interfered in the Canadian election, right, to say that he prefers Mark Carney and this kind of thing, and giving Canadians the impression that the trade war would be de-escalated if it's Carney rather than Poilievre, because Trump likes Carney better than Poilievre. So again, it's coming back to the narcissism and personality and style of politics of Trump and the MAGA movement that he's created.
Right. So on a related note, Benoit Lombert asks, and let me just say by way of background before I share the question with you, Chrystia Freeland, whom I think all of us would regard as being more or less Canada's Victoria Nuland, and who threw her hat into the leadership contest for the Liberals and got crushed, which I think was entirely predictable by Mark Carney. She did nonetheless retain her seat in University of Rosedale in Toronto, where a lot of rich people live. And I don't know if Carney has announced his cabinet, but I would imagine she is going to have a ministerial position. In any event, the question with that as background is, will Freeland succeed in dragging Canada into the USA, Ukraine, Russia war? Why don't I start with you, Yves? What do you think about that?
I don't think so. I think it's going to collapse. I don't think that there's just a report about how many European troops, and they say they couldn't even get 25,000 European troops to Ukraine. I don't think it's real, right? I think this is just an effort to basically, cynically, to convince Ukrainians to keep going, even as they're just losing more territory and having more people killed. And their situation doesn't get better by the day; it gets worse by the day. And so it's just a whole kind of like hype to go that direction. I would be astounded if there's Canadian troops sent to Ukraine to fight in a formal sense. We know that there's been Canadian troops, special forces on the ground, and obviously before early 2022 there was the whole training exercise and all that. But the actual formal kind of like Canadian troops fighting, that's just not and or peacekeeping, quote unquote peacekeeping. Neither of those are on the agenda.
Right. Alex, what do you think? You think this Mr. Coalition of the Willing is going to be persuaded by Miss Freeland to expose Canadian soldiers to the wrath of the Russian military?
I think Carney should never have put Chrystia Freeland in the cabinet. I mean, she got such a poor result in the leadership race. He had no obligation to give her a cabinet position after that. She resigned from cabinet. So the fact that he threw her back in is unfortunate. And although it may not go to the point of having Canadian troops directly engaged in combat against Russia, which would essentially be a declaration of war from Canada towards Russia, a country that we share a border with in the Arctic, it could still lead to the sending of more equipment and more money and more political support. So I see this problematic on that way, and I would be much more comfortable if the Sea of Freedom was not put into the next cabinet.
Okay, I don't see any other questions in the chat. I'm going to ask one last question to you both. I'm curious to know your views on the following, and that is, do you think that the demise of NATO is imminent, or do you think this beast is going to continue to survive for many more years to come? Why don't we start with Alex?
I mean, it's hard for me to predict what will happen with NATO and with Trump talking a bit about against NATO. It's kind of just a way to get the different countries to pay more into their military and that kind of thing. So, you know, it's yet to be seen what will happen with Trump's peace effort, and even Trump saying that the United States shouldn't be involved in war in Ukraine. It could be seen as just a way to get Europeans to take more of a leading role in it and have them invest more in their military, which of course benefits to a large extent U.S. Weapons manufacturers and that kind of thing. So I would hope that NATO would be disbanded and that the United States would accept the emergence of the multipolar world without going towards a massive global war to get there. So I like to try and remain hopeful that that'll be the case, that we'll have a peaceful transition to a multipolar world. And a lot of that is in the hands of NATO and NATO countries.
Indeed.
I think that there can be a peace agreement in Ukraine and NATO can continue. I don't see this as a existential to NATO. I don't agree with that. I think NATO is designed to target Russia, but it's not just designed to target Russia. It's designed to extend U.S. power globally, and you know it begins as that. And if you look at what NATO's done in many different places, it's had effectively nothing to do with Russia. So be it destroying Libya, be it Afghanistan. I mean, Afghanistan maybe a little bit to do with Russia, and Yugoslavia a little bit to do with Russia in '99, but not really, not principally. So I think NATO can continue. I think the one success that we've seen with Donald Trump is that he has increased the pace of international, or NATO specifically, military spending. So I think a lot of his sort of trade tariff threats and this and that have just been not well done. Even if you wanted to pursue a more nationalistic U.S. Economic policy, which could include increasing tariffs, the way he's pursued this is just totally unstrategic and just bad tactically. But I do think that some of his sort of threats have had, from a U.S. Perspective, particularly U.S. arms company perspective, has bolstered increased military spending, which is something that U.S. has long wanted. I think he's gone maybe too far in terms of they're turning away from U.S. weapons companies to some extent. There's some indication of that. But yeah, I don't think NATO is necessarily going to collapse unless Donald Trump decides he wants to do that. And I think that the Pentagon and the power structure in the U.S. is not, would push back very hard against any of that kind of inclination from Trump. So unfortunately, I mean, I think that the best way for NATO to collapse, of course, would be for peace movements and anti-war movements to come together collectively in all the NATO countries and say, this is not the model that we want for the world, and we don't want more militarism, and we don't want to maintain Euro North American imperialism. But at this moment, that those movements aren't that strong.
So I actually just saw two quick questions, which I'd like to deal with. One of them was addressed to me from Bruce LePage, who asked me if I would consider running to be the leader of the NDP. I don't have any plans to run to be the leader of the NDP. I'm not particularly excited about the idea of entering electoral politics again after what happened in 2020. There was a lot of shenanigans, a lot of dirty tricks, smears on an almost daily basis. But I wouldn't rule it out. I must say, however, that if I did throw my hand into the ring, I think it's almost inevitable that the NDP brass would try to stop me from running. They've nixed people who were like Jessa McLean, I think, who wanted to become the president of NDP, who were good, solid people, people of integrity, but who were less outspoken than I am about things like Canadian foreign policy. So if they wouldn't let them run, I can't imagine they would let me run. Now, there was a final question. Let me just scroll down here, which I think is a very important question. I'd like to suggest that my guests, because we're now almost to the limit, keep their answers brief. But if you just bear with me here. The question, here we go. Captain James T. Kirk. Captain Kirk asks, politics is locked down by oligarchs. Canadians are ignorant of basic political and economic concepts. Voting is pointless. In short, Canada is not a functioning democracy. Agree, disagree? Start with you, Alex. Again, and I'll ask you both to keep your answers brief because we're almost at the end of our time.
I mean, look, in this election, I considered destroying my ballot, right? I figured that all of the parties and candidates that were running in my district were complacent in the war machine. We're not proposing really bold solutions. But at the end of the day, I decided to vote because there is a difference between the parties. Like, it's not really fair to say that, for example, the Conservatives are identical to the NDP or identical to the Green Party. And if one wants to maximize their political influence, then you may as well use all the political tools that you have. And voting is certainly not the be-all, end-all of exerting political influence, but it is one of many tools. And so may as well use every tool that there is.
Yves, agree or disagree that Canada is not a functioning democracy?
Of course, it's not a functioning democracy. Can you have democracy when there's no democracy in the economic realm? No, you can't. You have to have some form of economic democracy. You can't have billionaires and then people who have nothing and say, oh, we all have equal say. It's ridiculous. Now, does that mean we have no democracy? No, we do have some elements of democracy be it from free speech to, being able to vote, things like that, that the reaction to the dearth of democracy in the economic realm, most obviously, but then it broadens into the political realm, is not to just to throw away the areas that we have some democratic rights. It's to expand those, right? It's to push for, if we can vote in elections, why can't we vote to decide who's the boss at the workplace? So that's what we need to do to expand democracy. And it's not easy, but it's not impossible also.
I completely agree. And I'll just say this in response to Alex's comments about voting. For the first time in my life, I did not vote in this election. This was a conscious choice on my part. It was not at all complacency. If I thought that voting would be the right thing to do, I would have voted. In my riding, it was absolutely crystal clear that the winner was going to be a Liberal or Conservative. It was absolutely crystal clear that the next Prime Minister was going to be a Liberal or Conservative. And my reasoning is simply this. The higher the voter turnout, the more they are going to claim that they have a democratic mandate. So I thought, why give them the satisfaction of, voting, casting a vote, even if it is for somebody else? I don't want them. I'm going to do whatever I can to weaken the argument that they have a democratic mandate. So that's why.
I almost did the same, actually. I almost did the same, but I was on the balancing back and forth, and I did decide to vote this time.
Right. Yves, do you care to let us know whether you decided to vote?
I voted, and I voted for Nima Machouf, the NDP candidate. My debate was whether I thought she had a chance. Ultimately, I was completely wrong on that. It was about 50% to 20% for her. I would have, if I would have known how big the margin was, I would have voted for Adrien Welsh, who's the Communist Party candidate in my riding, who I know personally, who's active in lots of different movements. I feel a little bit bad that I didn't vote for him because of that, but yeah.
Yeah, and one of our colleagues, Mark Sakia, is saying that he spoiled his ballot, and hard to feel excited about voting nowadays. In any event, that's our live stream for today, folks. Very appreciative to you all for joining us. If you don't subscribe to Reason to Resist, please do so. We're approaching 70,000 subscribers, and our goal is to get well over 100,000 before the end of the year. And if you found this to be an informative discussion, please like the video. And we look forward to speaking with you in the future. And finally, a huge thanks and shout out to my two guests. It's always a great pleasure to talk to you, and keep up the good fight. Take care.